Welcome to our Educational Diagnosticians series. For this installment, we're going to talk about attending case conferences and being a representative of the multidisciplinary team during those conferences. So we're going to talk about the different case conference members that are required at different kinds of meetings, because every meeting has a different set of required participants. As well as being the MTeam representative and what that role really requires. So what do you need to understand, be able to explain in order to represent the MTeam at that conference? So we're going to start by talking about the different roles that are required for every single case conference. Every single time we meet, whether it's an annual case review, whether it's at an initial conference, after a reevaluation, for a manifestation, it does not matter. Every conference has certain people that have to be part of this meeting. So every conference has to have an LEA representative or a public agency representative. That typically is the principal, or it could be the principal's designee. And the principal can designate this authority really to anyone that they feel has the understanding of the whole process and has the authority at this meeting, by having this role, to commit resources. So if we are offering a plan to a student, that plan requires certain manpower. It requires maybe some technology. It requires time and commitment, and the public agency representative or LEA representative is the person who says, we promise to do this. I can commit these resources for this particular student. Another required member for every conference is to have either the student's current teacher of record, and in the case of a student with a language impairment or speech impairment, the SLP, the speech language pathologist, is that teacher of record. Or if we are at the point of an initial evaluation and we're meeting to determine eligibility, then it needs to be a teacher licensed in that area of disability that is suspected. So if we did an evaluation for a student who we suspect as deaf or hard of hearing, we need to have a teacher licensed in that area as the special ed teacher representative at this meeting. So again, it depends on the disability area that we're looking at, who that person could be, who the pool of teachers could be that we select from. Every meeting has to have at least one of the student's general education teachers, with this caveat: if the student is or may be participating in general education environment. Now, this is most of our students. We have very, very few students out there who don't have some kind of participation in the general education environment. And those general education teachers are an extremely valuable member of the case conference committee. They have an understanding of typical behavior and performance at that grade level. They have the best understanding of the grade level standards and the curriculum used at that grade level. So they are there to represent that perspective, as well as to share information about how the student performs in that setting, whether they utilize the accommodations that are provided, how they respond to different things. They can give a lot of really good information, and we're looking to the gen ed teacher to provide us with that information at each of those case conferences. Preschool's a little different because most of our preschool students are not participating in or have a general education teacher. They may have an early childhood teacher. So the requirements are a little bit different there for preschool, but we do want somebody that has a good understanding of the typical world rather than just looking at things from the perspective of a student with a disability. At every conference, there must be somebody there who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results. Now, this is not the same as saying we need to have a team member from the evaluation team there. If that was the case, we would have a diagnostician or a psychologist or an SLP at every case conference. What this is saying is we need to train our team members well. We need to have somebody who can say, even though we did this evaluation 2 years ago, if we need to look back at it to inform our decisions, I can help interpret that. I can help tell you about what the instructional implications are based on what we knew about the student at that time of evaluation. So this role can be filled by one of the other team members, the public agency representative, the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher. Any of those people could fill that role as well. And typically that is the case, that you're most of the time I see the teacher of record or the special educator who is already part of the team is also listing themselves as the instructional strategist. Every case conference committee meeting needs to include in their invitation the parent or the student of legal age. Now, in this case, it does give the out of unless the student or the parent choose not to participate. So the student and parent actually can opt out. Now, we definitely want to encourage parent participation. That is a goal for every meeting, to have parent and student involvement whenever we can and to the greatest extent possible. But the parent can say, I don't want to participate. Meet without me. Go on and have this meeting. And we can still do that when that's a choice, rather than we've just held this meeting at an inconvenient time for the parent. In that case, we want to work to reschedule where we can have that parent involvement. Now, it's different for our other required team members. They cannot choose not to participate. The only way that those required roles can be excused from a meeting, either part of a meeting or the whole meeting, is to have written parent permission to excuse them. So when you generate that notice of conference within the Indiana IEP system, it does allow for you to designate that we have certain members that we would like to excuse for all or part of the meeting, and there's a place for parent to give that written consent, or to choose to not give that consent. This needs to occur prior to the meeting. Now, in an ideal world, you would send this notice home, the parent would check the form, send it back to you, and you would already know in advance that we've gotten written excusal. That doesn't always happen. In fact, we know that a lot of times either our parents will bring this form back to the conference on the day of conference and walk in with it, sometimes signed, sometimes not, or they don't bring it back at all or send it back at all. And in those cases, what I would suggest is that if you are going to still ask for that excusal, that you meet the parent prior to them entering the room where the conference is being held and have that discussion. Because think about it this way, you're asking a parent to consent to something that they may or may not truly consent to. Doing this in front of other professionals sitting around the table is an extremely intimidating situation. So I know, just putting myself in that role of a parent, if somebody asked me, do you care if, Mrs. Smith goes back to her classroom because we only have a sub in there for 15 minutes and Mrs. Jones needs to go and do bus duty, so she's probably going to have to leave early, and you don't mind, do you? What is a parent going to say? I've only had one time in the history of my career that a parent said, No, I don't give permission for that. And in that case, we had to make a decision as a team to say, well, we either have to reschedule or we have to have that person stay within the meeting and not leave, because that is really left to the parent. So catching the parent prior to the meeting is probably the best situation that you can do under those circumstances, to say, we need to have this happen. Can you let me know, are you okay with granting this, or would you prefer that we reschedule this meeting? Those required members are also, if they're being excused, required to give written input into the IEP, into the development of the IEP. And sometimes we don't do that as well. So I would encourage you to, gather some of that written input for any of those team members that you're concerned may be needed to be excused for part or all of a meeting, just so that you have it. And getting that input can be really helpful anyway into figuring out the present levels of performance for the student, figuring out what accommodations are appropriate, which ones are going well, which ones are not being used by the student, how they're doing in relation to the classroom material that they're given, all of that kind of stuff that you can get from different team members. There are also some other circumstances that will require us to have other members included. So if we're looking at a very different kind of placement, such as having the student at an alternative school, at a state-supported school, such as the Indiana School for the Blind, or a non-public school, there are other folks that need to be part of this case conference committee. If we have a student who's transitioning from Part C, First Steps, into the public school preschool program, we've got other folks that need to be considered. When a student is of transition age, they need to be included. So students who will be turning 14 during the life of the IEP or older, those students need to be invited to the meeting as well. And then if a student is old enough to where they might be receiving some services from a transition agency, we need to have those folks involved as well. So think about those different situations. They're all spelled out in Article 7. But as we have those unique situations, we may have other people that are required members. And so again, in thinking about the required members, those are the members other than the student and parent that you would need to have an excusal for if they're not going to be there for the whole meeting. Now the last piece that's different, and this is where we all come in as part of that multidisciplinary team, is when the purpose of the meeting is to discuss initial evaluation results and make that initial eligibility determination, then we need to have at least one member of the MTeam that was part of the evaluation that looked at the students' assessment results. They need to be there at the meeting. So you cannot have a meeting with just an instructional strategist when it is an initial evaluation. You have to have an MTeam member there. But Article 7 really doesn't say who that person is. It just says a qualified educational professional that was part of the MTeam. So it could be the school psychologist, it could be the SLP, it could be the diagnostician. Sometimes, since a special educator is always part of the multidisciplinary team, it could be that person, occupational therapist, physical therapist, social worker. Any of those people could represent the MTeam. Not all of these people may be comfortable representing the MTeam in total to describe what was in the evaluation. And I think everyone out there who's watching this right now, you're probably assessing for yourself, okay, well, I'm comfortable explaining certain parts, but maybe not all of them. So we have to think about, who do we need to have there? who needs to explain things, or could I get myself ready to explain those things and be the representative? Because again, it's not legally mandating any one of these people to be there, just saying that we have to have a representative from the multidisciplinary team at the meeting. So let's think about what that role is. Number one, you're probably going to be the person who is going over the report, explaining the information. You're also going to be talking about answering different questions and linking all of this to the instructional implications. So the information from the report, from the evaluation, now what does it mean? Now, how do we develop this IEP? What do we do? So even in thinking about that role of being there as an MTeam representative, if you're there for an initial, that means that you are a required member, and if you're going to need to leave early, then you will need an excusal. I would strongly advise you to not leave early and to be there for the whole thing, because really helping to shape that initial IEP from the results of the evaluation is important. It's not I share my information and walk out the door and you do with it what you need to, because there need to be some very direct links between what did we find, now what do we do? What does it mean, and what do we do to help the student? So here are some things that you can think about. So prior to even saying, yes, I will be happy to go and sit in as the MTeam representative for this meeting, make sure that you can explain things. And if you can't, if other people aren't going to be there that might have a piece of the report, if you read through the report and don't understand a piece, get clarification. Check in with those other professionals about, tell me how to explain this part of your report. How can I put this in words that the parent can understand? And I would also encourage you, as you do that, if there are things that are very unclear to the team members, they're probably written in a way that's not going to be clear to the parent anyway. So let's go back and reshape that report to make it more straightforward and clear with some good explanations and good examples. Work within your competency area, but continue to build that competency. So if I'm the school psychologist and I'm representing the MTeam, I am not an expert in occupational therapy or the motor tests that they use, but I feel like I have built the capacity to be able to share the information. But I also know that there are times when maybe I didn't come in quite as prepared and I get asked a question that I'm not prepared to answer. Always say, I don't know, but I will find out. Don't give an answer that is outside of your competency area when you're not confident in the information. It is much better to say, I can't answer that, but let me find out. Let me email this person. Let me have them get in touch with you individually. Let's see if we can get them on the phone right now. Whatever it takes to get that information cleared up without sharing misinformation. But you can build that competency. We spend enough time working with each other and talking about the results that we can get to a point to where any of our team members could really come in and fill this role, so that it's not the same person sitting at every IEP meeting. Sometimes we may need to have more than one person there. Other times we may think about, who really is best to share the bulk of this information. Having staffing, some people will have a meeting within their MTeam or within some of the other school members prior to the case conference. Staffings are legal, staffings are okay, as long as you are not making decisions. You are not making any final decisions, and you have to make sure that everyone is of the understanding that when I go into the case conference committee, I have to have an open mind. Everything that we talked about before was just preparation and planning, but we can go a different direction. because no final decisions are made outside of a case conference committee, which includes that parent input. There may also be times when you want to attend case conferences in pairs in order to hear how other people explain things. And I think that's why I feel comfortable at this point discussing results from the social work assessment, from the speech and language assessment, from those pieces, because I've been in enough meetings with other professionals and I hear how they explain things, and I can explain it. I still don't have that same depth of knowledge in those areas as the other professionals, but I can explain what was in the report to the parents in case they can't be there as well. Bring your report, highlight it, mark it up, make yourself some notes, check in with those people to say, how would you explain this if a parent asks a question or if a teacher asks a question? I would also very much encourage you to never just read your report verbatim. Unless you want people to fall asleep, it takes so much time to read things verbatim. Get to the point, talk about what it means. Ask, you've probably all read this report already. First, do you have any questions? And then we're going to go through, in general, what these different sections mean. But reading things word for word is pretty tedious and boring, and it takes up a ton of time during meetings. So again, get to the point and talk about the implications of what those results mean. So hopefully this will help you to be stronger and more confident in representing the multidisciplinary team. It's definitely a process, and I think all of us are still learning how to really share information in a succinct, meaningful way at meetings. So we'll continue to build this skill set together. Thank you for being part of the series. Please visit our Padlet for more resources and information, and continue to be part of this learning cohort.